Hi, Jerry Visick here, and this video is going to be a demo for how to paint Drybrush. I'd like to talk about the supply list for Drybrush before we start. In this demo was preceded by a video on surface preparation for your painting, and there was another video on how to make a homemade palette for acrylic painting. My supply list here is a little ripped. Anyway, supply list for Drybrush technique. You need a surface to mount your illustration board, which I explained in the surface preparation video. So this is the surface that we mount our board on, that we're going to be painting on. You need an illustration board or a canvas or something to paint on. You're going to need various acrylic paints. Now, you know, I like to teach students that they can get away with, you know, a cad red, a cobalt blue, and a cad yellow, and mix a lot of colors from those. Obviously, you can expand on your palette, but those three you can do a lot with before you go breaking your bank, you know, and then you want some white, possibly some black, but black, you know, you can usually mix a pretty good black yourself. You're going to need white gesso, so they're on the list, white gesso. And this is a tube of the white gesso here. They come in various sizes. They even come in buckets, you know, if you're going to paint large. And it's inexpensive, you know, acrylic paint that's used for ceiling canvases and can suffice as white paint sometimes. Various flat acrylic brushes. Now, what I have here are some used flat acrylic brushes. Now, these are horsehair bristle brushes. Hog's hair, horsehair, bristle brushes, or imitation, because you want the brushes to have sort of a roughness to them to be able to do the dry brush. These brushes have been around, so they want to have a little, they want to have some texture to them. You don't want them smooth like a watercolor brush. For what we're doing, it won't work. One or two small brushes, sable or imitation sable. When you want to do your fine work, you know, you want some very, very fine brush when you're trying to do detail. Not for the dry brush per se. This is a watercolor brush too that comes to a fine tip. You don't want to use the watercolor or sable brushes for the dry brush, but you want to use them for doing detail. And obviously, always clean your brushes, but especially the sables, they're so expensive. But imitation sables work as well. Large stainless steel cookie sheet. So that's the cookie sheet that I explained in the palette video that I uploaded to YouTube. And a few sheets of designer's vellum. Now the designer's vellum, once again, when I talked about the palette prep, you know, you can buy vellum, you know, by the sheet, by the roll. This comes in a pack already, which is kind of cool because I can cut this to fit right into my palette. And it can be clear or gridded. They only had gridded when I bought that pack, so that's why it's gridded. Paper towels. So you always want to have paper towels handy when you're painting, period, you know. You don't have to go running for those. Water containers. So you see where we need water containers, and you want to have two. One water container would be for cleaning your brush to get any paint out of your brush when you want to use the brush for something else. That would generally be a larger container, or if you have a sink nearby, you know, next to you. And then a smaller container of water for getting your brush wet. You don't want to use muddy water for getting your brush wet when you're going to, you know, use some clean paint. Small blow dryer, there's one now. There's a small blow dryer. That's just one I picked up at Ralph's some time ago. Sorel transfer paper. The Sorel transfer paper is, if you're transferring your drawing, is comes in a packet like this, like sandwich wrap. And if you saw my scratchboard demo, I used some of this. For our purposes, we're using, for my demo here, I'm using yellow Sorel transfer paper, as you'll see in a little while. And I'll show you how to transfer the drawing in a little while. Pencils, you know, just if you're transferring your drawing, you're going to need a pencil. Now, what did I do with my pencil? So just, you know, the HB is going to do for what I'm doing for transferring my drawing. Artist tape. There's some artist tape back there by my coffee. You're going to need that for sure, and you're going to need patience. With learning any technique, you need patience. You need patience with understanding how to get your textured surface. You need patience with learning how to do the dry brush technique. If you're trying to learn to play the guitar, the piano, sing, dance, it takes time to be able to develop it. So be patient with yourself, but kind of follow the instructions of the way that I'm showing it here if it works for you. Great. And then, did I mention the palette knife? I wrote that in pencil. You need a palette knife for mixing your paint. Yeah, you don't want to mix your paint with a butter knife or with your brushes, because you can get a lot of paint built up in your brushes that you're not going to use. Then you have to clean it all out of your brush and you wasted paint. This particular technique was taught to me years ago by a really, really good friend and a fantastic illustrator, Nathan Ota. And when he showed me this, it impressed me quite a bit, and I've shown it to a lot of students. So I'm pretty much set up here to start my painting. I'm going to be getting paint. When you see me doing the painting, you're not going to see the whole setup all the time, but I'm going to be getting paint from my palette here. I have some colors pre-mixed, and I'll be painting directly onto my surface here. And this, let me move my brushes, this excess surface here, the reason that's there is when you're dry brushing, when you're actually putting paint on your brush and you're going to dry brush, you want to get excess paint off your brush so you can, and you'll see in the demo, so you can scumble your color across the texture. You want to scumble your color across the texture. If you have too much paint on your brush, you're not only building up thick layers of paint, which we don't want to do for this technique, but you're also eliminating your initial texture that you put down when you prepared your surface. And that texture is sacred. So once again, the whole setup here, let me scoot back a little bit. I'm not a filmmaker. A dining room table's fine. It doesn't matter, where you're set up. But I have a drawing table here. There's my dog. He's always jumping into my videos. There's my drawing table. I have a light there, and then over here I have another table where I have my palette and paint set up. So any big flat surface. The great thing about being able to tilt your table back or your drawing board back is you can always see your work more perpendicular. When you're sitting down looking at your work, if you're seeing it from this angle, you're seeing your paper go back foreshortened, or your surface that you're drawing or painting on is going back foreshortened. So the more perpendicular you can see your work, the better idea you have of how things are going to look, so you don't end up elongating things unintentionally. Yeah, and there's my blow dryer, and I guess I should get started. So I got a little tripod here, and I'm going to put my camera on my tripod, so bear with me so I can set this up. And I'm going to charge my phone so I don't run out of charge. I'm doing this video. A lot of useless information for you guys. Okay, now I believe I'm set up here. Should be. Let's talk a little bit about this technique before I actually start painting on that surface. I've got a couple here that are just in the way right now that I've done, for demos in the past. And this one here particularly has a lot of texture built up on it. You can see that texture built up. And then I painted on top of that texture. When I'm doing this today, once again, that texture is so important to maintain so I can drag my brush across the surface. And then the great thing about this dry brush technique is you're not literally blending your colors on the surface, but you're scumbling colors across the texture. So there's that gentleman. Here's another one. I like these kind of guys a lot. What I did here, now that's a dry brush demo I did, but then I took a brush pen. I can't remember what brand it was, but it was a pretty good brush pen that I could get nice thick and thin lines with, and came in and just kind of danced around with my brush pen without, creating an outline. And you can get a lot of fun results with that. But what I really want everyone to understand is how to be to create these value transitions with the dry brush. Line work is great to work with it, but sometimes line work can be dangerous on a painting because it can tend to flatten it out. Black and white guy. I call him No Me Gusta La Playa. The reason I'm showing this one is because it's in black and white, and you can see everything. You can see the values because there's no light values surrounding each other. I don't have the best lighting on this. It's important to understand that when you guys are drawing in black and white, or you're working in color, you want to be sure that if you squint at it, you can see everything. So when you squint at this black and white piece, you can see everything because I don't have like values surrounding each other. You know, I have a dark sky and a dark palm tree and etc. But you can see that they're different values, so you can see everything. So important, guys, when you're drawing and painting, because you can work on a drawing or a painting for 30 hours, and if you've got a lot of the same values surrounding each other, you don't see anything. So squinting, you know, closing your eyes very tightly is the litmus test for value contrast. Here's another one. I think it's a little more, the color's a little more neutralized. I call this self-portrait with a cat. And that's all done with the dry brush technique. And if you get up close, you can see the texture, I believe. Sometimes the camera doesn't pick it up as well as it could. This one is all dry brush. This is called Dancing Girl, and this painting was all done with the dry brush technique except for the details. That's where I came with a smaller brush. And I did some other fun things with this. You know, I got more neutralized, you know, imagery in the background, and I'm kind of echoing things with these clouds in her arms and this cloud in her torso. And it was a fun painting. The hair took a matter of minutes. It was just, it's all about values, guys. Okay. What did I show this one too? Oh, okay. Add seed. And this is all dry brush acrylic. And you can do so many wonderful things with it and get, why am I, oh, okay. These trees were done in just a couple of seconds just by scumbling them in. Okay, so, do I have more here? I hope not. No, they're for something else. But that's good because I want to move on to showing you how I'm going to go about doing this particular drawing, this painting. So let's move these aside. You know, you want to have your workspace as convenient as possible. If you have a chaotic workspace or you have things sitting that are out of reach, I'll be right back. You have things sitting that are out of reach, you can't find things. You're trying to paint, you're trying to draw, you're trying to, you know, make art, and it's two different zones. There's the zone where we're in the zone making our work, especially when it's going well. You know, that's a very exciting place to be. And then there's that other zone, like, you know, what the hell did I do with my brush? Oh crap, I ran out of water. You know, that can kind of interrupt the flow of the creative process and be a little frustrating. So every artist worth their salt should carry a sketchbook with them at all times. Little guilt trip for you guys. And I have a drawing in here that I did. Get to it. Oh, for this video. Here I am being unprepared. He is where did he go? This is frustrating. I can sing you guys a song while I'm looking for this, but you've really quit watching the video. Here he is. So I drew this guy, and I call this guy Protector of the Orb. I don't know why I called him that, but he's holding this ball, and he's turning his head. My dog making background noise. He's turning his head. Now, what's important about this drawing for our purposes is that I've got the lighting all resolved. So there's plenty of darks, middle tones, and lights, because we're going to be painting a light. So I've got, you know, highlights and lights and coarse shadows and reflected light. I've got all my values figured out. When you squint, you can see everything. Remember, that's the litmus test for being able to see things, is to squint and make sure there's no like values surrounding each other. So I like this drawing, you know, okay. And when I transfer it, I don't want to transfer it directly onto my board because there's so much graphite on it. So I made a little copy of it here, the exact same size. I scanned it and made a copy of it. So I'm going to lay this drawing on top of my surface in a little while and transfer them onto the board so I can paint it. So I've got the composition worked out. I've got the positive negative space worked out. I've got the lighting worked out. This is all process. This is all preparation for when you're going to do your work, so you're not, you know, spitting in the wind. You're not guessing, hoping it turns out good. The more process you put into a work of art, the better results you're going to get if you have specific expectations, because it saves you time too, because you don't keep starting over. So process is as important as anything in art. It may be more important than anything when you're trying to achieve specific things. I put some detail in there with some tiny telephone poles and such. But anyway, before I transfer him, if you watched the video where I had the surface preparation done, and if you haven't watched that, make sure you do. Move a couple of things out of the way. If you watch that video, then you know that I have a highly textured surface there. And what I'm going to do now is apply paint to that surface. You hopefully watched the video where I actually showed you how to prepare the palette. So there's 3 videos. One was preparing the surface, another was palette preparation, and now this video is actually painting. And right now, it's really important that I have a drink of coffee, so you may join me. So earlier I pre-mixed some paint that's over here on my palette. And what I want to do now, is I'm going to get this paint, I'm going to put a little bit of paint on my brush, just a little bit. I'm not putting, a little bit of water on my brush, just a little bit, so the paint flows a little more easily. I don't like to put the paint into my watercolor usually. Boy, I'm really screwing up here. Erase everything I just said for the last 15 seconds. I don't like to put water into my acrylic paint generally, unless I'm doing washes. You know, washes is another demo. I'll show you how to do under washes for a painting. It's another way of painting. But, you know, I like my paint to be fairly opaque for this. And as you can see, I'm really respecting the texture underneath. I don't want to lose that texture that I put down with the gesso in the previous demo, two previous demos. You know, I had student once asked me, they said, hey Jerry, what if instead of putting the gesso down first, I just make a thick glob of this paint that I mixed and just put it down and let it dry and use it for my texture. And I said, well, you can do that, but it's really expensive because gesso is not expensive. And this is cobalt blue that's neutralized. It's looking very gray in this video right now, but it looks bluer than what it does in the camera. Cobalt blue, this tube, I don't know how much this little tube costs, maybe $15, you know, but the gesso is much less expensive. So to build up your textures and to, you know, create any extenders where you want the paint, you know, to cover more area, gesso. And there's other extenders too. Okay, so I have this painted and I have my texture underneath, and that's all fine and good, that's all great. There's some funny lighting hitting that, isn't there? That's unfortunate. Let me see if I can do something about that. I will when I start painting. So here's where the blow dryer comes in handy. If I want that to dry, because it's just flat on top of my texture, I can blow dry it. blow dry it, and I'm not sure it's all completely dry yet. When you blow dry it, before you paint anything on top of that, you want to make sure that paint is bone dry, because acrylic is a funny animal where if you had painted something and it started to dry, and then you mix some paint and you're going to come in here and start painting on top of that partially dry acrylic, you end up making a mess. And some of you may have already experienced that, where you get where you start creating textures and craters and holes in your work, unwanted stuff like that. That's because the, I guess the term's viscosity of the partially dried paint is not the same as the wet paint you're putting on your board, and they fight each other. So with acrylic, you either want to blend pretty quickly, or this dry brush technique also works just beautifully. I'm a little concerned that's not completely dry there. You can touch it. Yeah, it's a little. Don't touch it too much at all, because you don't want to foul up your texture. It's taking a little while to dry. So now if I want to make this a little more solid, you can still see some of the white gesso underneath. If I want to make it a little more solid, I can come in and paint on this dry, this is dry now, this dry acrylic. If you want to. I mean, some folks like to have some of that white texture showing through, when you go to art museum, gallery, and see artwork in person, you see, excuse me, I gotta get a little more paint off of this. When you see a Van Gogh in person, and you can see all the built up, impasto when he used his brush and maybe a palette knife, or a Cezanne, or when you can see a Peter Paul Rubens and see the actual brush strokes and the actual colors. It's such a wonderful experience. It's way cool to look at this stuff in art history classes, of course, but the sensation of seeing it, seeing what the artist actually created, and seeing the mark making is pretty magical. I have all the respect in the world for digital art. My argument with it is, if you want to see the Mona Lisa, you have to go to Paris, and then if you're lucky, you get to see it with the lines and the crowds. But digital art has no original. It has no original, and just the original, with art is so sacred. That's not to denigrate digital art, you guys. That's just the one quarrel I have with it. So let's wait for this to dry a little more. While I'm doing that, let's see if I can do a little bit more with the lighting here. At the same time, it's so important that you can see. No, that's a little dark, isn't it? I'll work on this. The glare is a bit of a concern. Like I said, I'm not a professional filmmaker. If I tilt my my board a little different. I'll adjust the light a little. I'm still waiting for that to dry, so I'm not trying to waste your time. Wasting my time. Too bad you guys can't actually interact and tell me if that's better or worse. So when that is completely dry, I'm then going to transfer my my drawing right on top of that. Okay, this is what I have to do, and what I'll do while I'm painting is sometimes I'll hold it up closer to the camera and such. So is it dry? Not quite. Let's dry it a little bit more. You don't want to work on top of a wet surface here. You can speed up this part of the demo in your video if you like. Don't press your hand down hard when you're checking to see if it's dry, because you don't want to mess up, your paint. Watching paint dry is really boring, and hopefully I sped it up a little. Okay, there's my surface that I'm going to work on. Splendid. Now, the drawing that I'm going to transfer. When I prepared my surface here, I prepared a format, and I think you can see the edge of the tape here, that is 6 by 8 inches. So this drawing is 6 by 8 inches. So when I line him up here, I want to line him up perfectly, because if your drawing's crooked at all when you put it in, you're going to have to redo it unless you want to stick with a crooked drawing. So we want to make sure that it is stationary, and I use the artist tape for that. I make sure my drawings lined up. It's got to be lined up right, guys. So you want to take your time with this. Check your corners, check to make sure it's lined up exactly. Check your right angles. I can be a little careless with the demo if I want to, because it's a demo, but I don't want you guys to carry those careless practices into your work. So line it up perfectly. And then, when you have it where you want it, get a piece of tape, and you have some excess here above your drawing, and tape this down exactly so that you can then lift this like so, and make sure it's firm. It can't be loosely on there. That tape has to hold it down pretty darn good. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to take a piece of pre-cut transfer paper. So if you remember earlier, I showed you this Sorrel transfer paper, and that comes in a box like cellophane in a roll. Well, what I did is I cut a sheet out that'll fit right under here. And you put the shiny side down, or the bright side down. You see there's two sides to this. This is akin to the old carbon paper that we used to use with typewriters or some type of tracing. That's where CC comes from, carbon copy, which we never make carbon copies anymore, but we still CC people digitally. There's some nice trivia for you. You got to make sure that it's covering your drawing. Remember, shiny side down, because if it's not, your drawing's not going to transfer entirely. So then this is rested right on top of your transfer paper, which is right on top of your surface. The transfer paper you could take in and out, you can move it around, but your drawing really can't change from where it is. So let's transfer him. So what I'm going to do is essentially redraw him. I'm going to do most of the line work. I'm not going to do any value here, guys. I'm just going to figure out where the line work is. I want to get him, as close to that as possible without it being some, tight-ass drawing. So I'm going to come in here and pick a spot. You got to kind of pay attention where you are, because you might not see all the lines you've drawn. And this is important, guys, when you're doing this, so you don't make your drawing too stiff, because when I drew him initially, he was nice and loose, and to maintain that looseness, you don't want to come in here and be like, real uptight, you want to just kind of come in and loosely draw him while getting all the information you need, because the transfer process is akin to tracing, where we lose that original spontaneity of the initial drawing. If you've been in a life drawing class, everybody's made a gesture drawing at some point where, in 60 seconds, they're like, oh my God, who made that drawing? I can't believe it came out of me. It's the magic happened. And then if you try to redo that drawing, it doesn't have that same spontaneity. Or if you trace it, God forbid, you lost the original breath that was attached to the drawing. Okay. Next coming up here. And then down here. Now, I'm going to stop for a minute to show you. He's transferring. Can you guys see that? He's transferring right through. And you can also do this later on to see if you've covered everything. But, you know, it's also a good idea to do this initially to make sure that you have the right side of your transfer paper down. Because if you transfer the whole thing and you have the wrong side down, the drawing's not there at all. And it's a little frustrating because then you got to do it again. Let's get his hair here. His hair is inspired by Bob Dylan. I'm sure Bob Dylan would love to hear that. I'm sure Bob Dylan wouldn't care. Okay, so you know, a couple of these lines might not be exactly where I had them initially. You know, you want to be very close. But if there's something that's a little off, I can always adjust it later. His elbow here. Get his elbow down here. So I'm just talking while I'm doing this. And here's his orb. I said he's protector of the orb. And get his fingers in there. Let's see where we're at here. Yeah, he's transferring very nicely. Isn't that fun? Let's get his sideburns. Remember, don't come in here and get where you feel like, gosh, I got to make every single line that I initially put down, you know, because then you're just going to get a stiff drawing. I like to put arrows in sometimes showing directional movement. You know, it's... And there's some landscape back here, some telephone poles that they kind of look like crucifixes. Probably something to do with my Catholic upbringing. A lot of things have to do with my Catholic upbringing, but that's another story. So then, you know, I got this little landscape back here. This is called drawing through what I'm doing right now, guys, by the way. This is for drawing in general. If I want this landscape to continue over here, with the sense of seamlessness, you carry your pencil right through and then you know, continue over here. That applies to drawing in general. If you have a line ending here and there's something blocking it, you don't want to come over here and guess where it is, especially in life drawing. So you just kind of carry it over, even if it's lightly, and then you continue it. And the same goes for through his wrist here. How much of the drawing do we have? We might be good to go. I think I might actually draw some lines indicating where his temple is and the ridge of his nose, you know, some of his cheek, his zygomatic bone here for when we start doing the lighting, we have more of a guide. I think we're good to paint. I always say that, then I always see something else. There goes one of my brushes on the floor. Now it's rolling under my couch. Marvelous. So, I'm taking this off. Now, if you take this drawing off, I'm going to take it off. If you take it off, you can't put it back. You won't like, oh crap, am I going to tear it? Fortunately, it's a printout. If you take it off, you can't line it back up. You just can't. Some line's going to be off. Okay, now that's kind of a cool aesthetic unto itself because, you know, we have this kind of cool yellow line drawing. Here's the transfer paper. This kind of cool yellow line drawing on top of this, you know, neutralized blue color here. So you can see him. Okay, time for some more coffee. So I'm going to start painting him. And I'm going to start with his face because that's, you know, where I have a lot of the lighting going on here. Excuse me, my tripod. That was an earthquake, actually. No. So I have his face very lit, so I'm going to start with his face. Excuse me just a moment. So I pre-mixed a flesh tone for him. Flesh tones, if you look at 30 people, you're going to see 30 different flesh tones. You know, to find two flesh tones exactly alike pretty much doesn't happen. And never buy a color called flesh tone. They actually had those when I was a kid, back in, you know, way back when, in our crayon box. Here's flesh tone. And there was no option. So you can mix your flesh tone, you know, warm or cool, and you can mix it brown or rosy or pink, or, you know, any variation on the variety of flesh tones that we have. And then, you know, the more you get used to painting, the more you'll be even be mixing other colors into the shadows and various temperatures in the flesh. But I mixed a flesh tone, a generalized flesh tone here for this guy that I can start coming in and then actually dry brushing into his face. So what brush am I going to use? I think that I'm going to start with something fairly large here. I think I'm going to start with this guy here. Now this is a round bristle. So I pick up a little paint here. Now over here, guys, I'm getting excess paint off my brush, okay? I picked up a little paint from my palette. I'm getting excess paint off my brush. Then I'm going to come in here and start scumbling very lightly. This is a big brush. Just kind of laying in some flesh tones here. I like that some of the blue shows through. So I'm just scumbling across his face here. Try something else with lighting here. So you can see that I have some value contrast down there already, and I actually have some lighting on his face. And I'm waiting for that to dry, and I can blow dry that if I want to. You know, I can blow dry it and work right on top of it. In the weather that I'm currently experiencing, it's going to dry, you know, pretty much on the spot because it is so flat. It doesn't have any impasto built up to it. I'm trying to get some more light on there. So there you have the face started. And, you know, blow drying, it's a good idea, but also you can feel to the touch. Again, put a little more down. So you notice I'm not being tight with anything here, guys. I'm being very loose. With art, we always go from, almost always, go from general to specific. So, and you know, if I'm going over some lines right now, I'm not gonna sweat that because I got plenty of background color I can come in and clean things up with. That doesn't mean be intentionally messy, but don't sacrifice, you know, the looseness of your work, especially early on, because you can never bring that back. Now, I like that. Now, if I want to, here's what you do now. If you're worried about it being wet, you blow dry it. Then, if I want to come in with a little smaller brush, I'm cleaning my brush that I used. And never leave your brushes sitting in your water because the metal will separate from the wood. All kinds of fun tips today, huh? Now I'm going to come in with a little smaller brush. My brush has got attached to tape over here. I wish I could go to Warner Brothers Studios and they would film all this for me. I asked them and they said no. So I've got a little smaller brush here and I'm going to come in and start hitting some lighting. So I've got my flesh tone. I don't want to move my camera. I'm afraid I won't get it back to the same spot, but I got my flesh tone mixed over here. I'm going to add a little bit of white to my flesh tone. Just a little bit, not much. I'm getting it just a little bit lighter. Not much. Now I'm getting the excess paint off my brush here. You can see here I'm doing that. And I'm going to come in and start hitting some of the light on his nose here. And I've got my my value study over here to look at. This brush is a little smaller. you know, and while I'm doing this, I mean, if you guys, you know, I don't have this video on fast forward. I guess I could make it fast forward. If you guys, you know, speed it up, you'll see that I'm just going to keep building up some value here right now. Some light value. I'm adding light. This is a form of reductive painting where we are painting the light with that nice dark middle tone underneath. We're painting the light. So much of traditional, you know, painting, well, a lot of it, we have a white surface. I went over the edge there. We have a white surface, and we draw on top of it with pencil or charcoal or what have you. The reductive method is when you have a mid-tone or dark mid-tone or even completely dark, and then you start painting the light into it. And everybody loves to do that once they start doing it. Okay, I'm gonna add a little more light. Now remember, I don't want to be tempted by detail. Detail is last with a capital L. I mean, there's some types of artwork you come in and you intentionally make one area really detailed while others are more loosely drawn. But you know, when you don't want to be thinking about detail too early, because that just messes you up. Get your lighting, get your composition, get your proportion. You can worry about using the small brushes for detail at the end, and then it's a lot of fun when you actually do it. So you want to understand, you know, lighting, of course, and with this guy, you know, the lighting's coming from the east, and illuminating his face, which is resulting in all these midtones and coarse shadows and cast shadows and reflected light. That's such an important thing to learn in your beginning drawing classes. You want to make sure that, you know, for representational work, you know, you want to get lighting down, you want to get perspective down, you want to get all those things down. Because when you actually doing your work, you don't want to have to be, you know, really learning how to do them while you're doing your work. You want to have those tools in your pocket, you know, ready to use whenever you want them. If you're working on a very expensive car, you want to have the right tools. You don't want to use a strip wrench to work on the car. And so you want to work with good materials, not necessarily, you know, super expensive, but good materials. And also in your toolbox is your skill set. You know, that's part of your tools. So when you make the work, you know what you're doing. You know, I mean, we get better as time goes on. We evolve. But you want to know what you're doing. Oh, his cheek here's got to get some light. Yes. You know, having some idea of the planes of the face is good for this type of work. You're trying to light a face. There's some light coming along his cheekbone here. You see the texture underneath? Can you guys see that with these brushes? So I hope you can see the texture underneath his cheekbone there. It's really quite cool. I love that the texture comes through. Okay, some more lighting. Don't get too much paint on your brush. That's another thing that happens is we get excited, you know, oh man, it's starting to look cool. I want to add some more light here or there. And then we have too much paint on our brush. We don't wipe it off and we lost our texture. We covered our texture with it. So gradually the light's getting built up on his face. The great thing about that underblue also is that can serve as shadows. you know, where it shows through can really be a good thing. You can leave a lot of it in the painting. The other great thing about having a solid, you know, value and color in the background is it kind of sets the tone for everything. It gives your work so much more unity when you have a base color underneath. His shirt's a different color than his flesh tone, so I'm not going to mess with that right now. Let's come in and do a little more to his nose. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to paint for a little while longer and then pick up the video again where I'm a little further along so you guys aren't bored through your teeth with me adding all this lighting in. Okay, I added a little more color in here, painting his hair, just kind of masked it in as a brown mask right now, and he added some color to his shirt. You know, got a mixed of green there, and I'm starting to play with the lighting of that, but I'm still very much at the generalized stage. I'm getting my colors and my values all put in before I start considering any detail. You know, I do want to come in and paint the eyeballs and the nostrils. I'll get to that, the lips and everything else, but if I don't have all of this stuff down first, it's going to look like a very inconsistent painting. So I'll go ahead and paint for a little more while here. And I keep looking at my my value study. The great thing about this paint is, I mean, you don't want to be intentionally careless, but you can always, you know, bring it back. If you painted something that didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, you dry the undercoat, and then you can paint on top of that. So there's a lot of good things about acrylic. One of the advantages of acrylic is the same as the disadvantage, in that it dries quickly. It dries quickly, which is great for this dry brush technique. It dries quickly, which is really hard for trying to get any kind of blending done. I mean, if you really, really like to blend, you know, yeah, I mean, you can use acrylics, but oils are much more akin to any kind of blending. I'm going to start playing with some coarse shadows here. I kind of started to do that along his temple here, and along his cheek. You know, when we have light, we have highlight and light and midtones and coarse shadows. We get, you know, reflected light under things. So I'm still looking at all that very much. If I want to build up a coarse shadow along his cheek down here, what I've done to get some of these darker areas is the flesh tone that I've already mixed, you know, for laying down the generalized values for the flesh here. I'm just using a little bit of that blue that I mixed and mixing it back into my paint a little bit to get some darker values. So it's my flesh tone without any light added to it. And I added a little bit of that neutralized cobalt blue. And I can come in here and kind of, you know, still dry brushing, start to build up some indication of a coarse shadow. Understanding coarse shadows and reflected light is, I mean, it really rocks. It's so key to start making things look 3D. You know, majority of us, you know, when we came up, we understood lighting, you know, to draw a painter to something that, as it turned away from the light, it got darker. But when we started understanding, you know, the science of lighting, just to a degree of breaking it down with the way light illuminates forms, a single light source, and then you can get into double light sources, etc. But when you have direct light, when you get your, you know, your light, as it turns, as it gets darker away from the form, there's also going to be reflected light bouncing from nearby surfaces. There's going to be coarse shadows as form turns away dramatically, you know. So you can't practice that stuff enough in your sketchbook. Setting up little white objects and hitting them with a desk lamp and doing charcoal studies of those until you feel like you're really starting to understand what's happening with them. Setting up little still lifes like you've had in your drawing classes and practicing that again. Just, light is a lifelong study. So I'm still trying to add a few dark values in here. Darker under his jaw here. And then later on, if you want real clean edges, all that can come. All that can come. Just keep getting your lighting in, keep getting your colors in. I changed my water once while I had the video off. You don't want to have muddy water over there. Like I said, I use one to clean my brushes and the other to wet my brushes, but eventually you just have to change those out completely anyway. I kind of lost the lighting along his cheekbone here. So get that back in. And then I got a little lighter down here, so I'm scumbling this light in here now. I brought in an additional light just now, a color correct light, as it's called. I should have brought it out to begin with, but it's helping me to see the colors much better. They sell lights that show the colors as supposedly as they truly look, unencumbered by too much of a bright bulb or what have you. I hope you guys can see I'm starting to get different values here. That value is different than that value, than that value, than that value. And having that kind of contrast, that range of light and dark is what really starts helping things look three-dimensional. While this area back here is dark, if you squint, it's pretty dark. You can still see the color and the temperature coming through. You can still see where some light's hitting it, more so than lights hitting along the coarse shadow area here. All those things have to be worked out. Something you would probably do more towards the end of painting is when you want to come in and get your edges more defined. When you want defined edges and you want to, have one color stop and another start, or one value start and another stop, whatever the case may be. When I laid down this initial background color, I mixed a lot of it so that I can have it not only for coming in and using, within the figure himself, but also have it for the background, because if I tried to mix that color again, it'd be impossible and things would look very spotty. Another reason we paint the background first is so you don't paint around it and get this sort of halo effect, But since I mixed up plenty of this neutralized cobalt blue, I can come in and see an area like, right here along the wrist here. It looks like I got some brown in there, and you can just come in and start, cleaning things up. Always referring to your preliminary so that you can see, where things are, where you want things to be. Once again, this could be closer to the end, or if you were going to mix up a sky color or whatever you wanted to do with the background, you don't necessarily have to keep that blue background. That was the base color underneath. But you can do that, towards the end. Once again, getting all your colors and values and proportion, lighting, all that stuff in is really the work. After that, it's fun. I'm adding a different value to the background now, and I can come back in and, clean up his hair more later. This color that I'm putting in is just a light version of my original cobalt blue that I mixed. And, I'm really digging the contrast between the character and the little landscape below. I have to redraw my telephone poles. And this sort of steel blue sky I'm putting in. This is a soft brush because I'm just laying in a lot of paint with it, and I want to get some edges, but I don't want to get, you know, too much paint on this soft brush. Oh, I'm not showing you what I'm doing. I don't want to get too much paint on this soft brush because I don't want to lose, once again, that texture underneath, you know, is sacred when I went to scumble at any point during this painting. However, you know, far along this painting goes, whether I work on it for another 20 minutes or I work on it for another 2 days, I never want to lose my texture. So I'm just kind of laying in the background back here, and I can come back in and refine it more later or add clouds or anything I want to it, you know. But I'm still very much being loose. And remember, that doesn't mean be sloppy. Sometimes I get a little sloppy, so I'm reminding myself at the same time. I think I painted in the orb a little while ago, the orb of truth. That's what he's protector of, the orb of truth. And I'll come in and, you know, give it more value in a little while as well. Starting to work in some detail. You know, I'm probably gonna finish this demo up and take off the tape from the drawing. But in the event that, you know, I want to work on this painting more another time, I'm gonna keep my palette where my mixed paint is wet. In case I want to, you know, come in and do more to it. I'd mentioned before in a demo, who's to say when a painting is finished, because you can get a lot of different interpretations of that. Generally, we know when it's finished. If I wanted to spend another 5 hours on this, super. If I wanted it to be finished, you know, very, very shortly, I think I could make that argument too. So I'm paying a little more attention to the eye and the ear. It's probably a good idea to just stick with one thing for a while. I tend to jump around a little too much, but if you're working on the eye, maybe just focus on that for a while, etc. So I'm starting to get in some darker values in there. With the blue I already had mixed to begin with. I'm not using any black. Black can really sort of flatten the painting out pretty quickly. The way I got this very dark value for the nostril here is I mixed some red and green and blue and got this nice deep dark. So if I wanted to add any, you know, so-called black to this painting, I'd prefer to mix it, you know, from my primaries and secondaries rather than coming in and just throwing a flat black in there, which can make the painting lose its richness. Okay, so I added a few more odds and ends to it. And once again, I can take this further. If I want to paint on it more tomorrow or the next day, I've got my palette over here and I can jump right back in as long as the paint on my palette stays wet. But when you're finished with the painting, there's a really, really fun part of you know, taking the tape off. And then if you realize, gosh, I wasn't quite finished with it, you can put the tape back on. But I want to go ahead and show you this, whether I'm going to continue working on this painting or not. I want to show you this process. Now, when you take your artist tape off, for one thing, you're going to take off the tape that is actually holding the piece down. Do so slowly, you know, because when you're taking it off of your actual illustration board, you can tear your board. It can actually tear into your work, and it's a little disappointing. But right now, I'm taking off the tape that's holding the board down to the surface that I've taped it to. This piece of masonite drawing board with the illustration board tacked on top. Let's get all these off. And you got to take your time with this stuff. You know, it's a lot of times we're excited to see what something looks like. I've seen students, you know, do really fine charcoal drawings with taped borders, And then they were so thrilled with their drawing, they quickly took off their tape and tore right through their drawing. And, and sometimes it was something they worked on for days. And that's kind of a bummer. So when you take it off, oh, you got a little tear there. See, I got a little overzealous. Make sure your hands are clean because, you know, your illustration board is, you want your hands to be clean anyway. You want to make sure your illustration board doesn't get, you know, fingerprints or paint on the white border. So once again, go slowly. If you do start to tear someplace, let's say it started to tear right here, what I usually do if that happens is I'll start from the other side and start slowly working my way back into that direction. I think we have one more to get off here. And then since, you know, it was taped down exactly, well, look at the tear. Bad demo, Jerry. Since it was taped down exactly as 6 by 8, when I take this tape off, I'm having a good old time here. I wonder if it's because of the heat. When I take this tape off, it'll be taped down exactly at 6 by 8. I mean, the border will still be 6 by 8, so I can, maybe I shouldn't have done this part, so I can retape it and work on it again if I wish, because, you know, it's nice to have that border. Slowly. And there's one little stubborn piece. You know, it looks nice too, like this. You know, I think that you know, when you've got the clean border around, if you're ever going to frame something or mat it, you know, this illustration board probably won't even show because the mat would probably come right to the edge of the artwork, you know, or just before it. But there you have a dry brush piece. Done with acrylic paint, and then any of the finer stuff, anything you see that is detail was done with, you know, smaller brushes. But once again, it's so important to maintain the integrity of that texture so that you can do this technique over it. And it's incredibly forgiving, dries fast, and you can work right back on top of it. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you for your time.